Welcome back for another special edition of the Comics Overtime podcast. Daredevil Born Again, Episode 4. My name is Dwayne. With me, as always, my good buddy Dan. Dan, how's it going?
Going well. Absolutely. Been hanging out watching a lot of Daredevil Episode 4 for the last couple days, and looking forward to visiting with you about it.
Yes, and we finally get the return of Jon Bernthal as the Punisher, which we knew was coming. We didn't know when it was coming. Apparently, I was reading on social media, it was apparently going to be later on in the season, but they actually moved it up to this episode right in the middle. And I think we haven't talked about it yet, but I think that was probably the best part of this episode.
All right. It was always good to see characters returning that you enjoyed in previous seasons. So it's very cool. We will indeed have a bullet point or two on him later, so we'll talk about him then.
All right, so since February 1st of last year, we've been reading through the comic book history of Daredevil in preparation for the new Disney Plus TV show, not knowing when or even if it would actually premiere. We're in our third week of new episodes. Last week, we saw the trial and acquittal of Hector Ayala. Fisk's former business associates are causing all kinds of trouble, and the shocking execution of the White Tiger in the closing moments of the episode. This week, we get episode 4, entitled Semper, Systema, and with it, the return of Jon Bernthal's Punisher. We've both seen the episode, so let's talk about what we saw and what it might mean going forward. But before we do that, as always, here is your spoiler warning. We're going to be talking a lot about what happens in the episode. Lots of interactions, lots of things. So if you have not watched the latest episode of Daredevil Born Again, episode 4, and you don't want it spoiled for you, definitely pause right now, watch the episode, then come back to us once you've seen it as we dive in and talk about what happened this week.
Interesting stuff, I think. I'm looking forward to it. We've got our blurbs and the like. I think you're going to start us off as usual with the Disney Plus complete explanation of the episode. What do we got here?
All right. So for episode 4, Semper Systema. First off, I wanted to mention 8.6 rating on IMDb. So it actually is slightly less rating as of the time of recording than we've seen for each of the first 3 episodes. As you said, the Disney blurb, Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk's darker halves fight to be unleashed. And I think by the end of the episode, they may have gotten free. It's kind of seems. But it's relevant. It is. I think we saw the beginning of the episode that veneer of these new people that Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk are trying to get even more chipped away at, and so by the end of the episode, it does sort of feel like we're back to where we were in the Netflix days a little bit.
A little bit, but
a little bit.
It's definitely weird. I think we'll talk about this later, but this is an entire episode without a single punch thrown, without a single shot fired, without really any direct violence at all. You just have some people preening and a little bit of people sort of bumping up against each other and trying to look tough. But it is a very odd episode in that way of Daredevil. There's no Daredevil, and there's no superheroing, and there's no vigilanteing. And so we'll talk about that. See what you think of Daredevil as a courtroom LA law style show.
So Dan, do you have a little bit of a write-up recap for what happened in episode 4 as sort of a level set before we dive into our discussion topics?
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a note, hopefully you've all watched the episode, you know that it bounces back and forth between the various members of the cast and the various storylines pretty substantially. But in essence, there are really four main story through lines in this episode. The first is sort of the fallout from White Tiger's murder. We first off see the episode begin with Matt talking to the coroner and collecting the effects of Hector Ayala. He then goes out and comforts Hector's niece, Angela. On his way out, he confronts the bad cop, Powell, who is the surviving cop from the subway. And in doing so, actually finds out that while Powell continues to be a shit, he is probably not actually responsible for the White Tiger's death, doesn't really know anything about it. So he's out of the loop in terms of how that happened. Later on, he finds the bullet casing from the shot that killed Hector, and that leads him to pay a visit to Frank Castle because the bullet casing that he finds actually has the Punisher logo on it. And so he wanders down, evidently knows exactly where Frank's been hanging all this time.
Yeah, he's been keeping tabs on Frank Castle, that's for sure.
Goes into the bowels of the city and has a little visit with him. We'll talk about that a little later. That kind of ends where we're at with the White Tiger at that point, is just basically with the Punisher saying, hey, it wasn't me. Stinking fanboys, right? Second part is Wilson and Vanessa Fisk and their relationship and how it's fraying. We start out with a tense counseling session between them and Heather. We then get to a kitchen table conversation where Fisk talks about learning a lot of things from his father, most of them about hurting people, none of them involving forgiveness. So he's having a little time trying to navigate all of this. And then end on that with a late dinner between the Kingpin, we're just going to call him the Kingpin at this point, and his wife's former lover, who he now has caged up in some sort of medieval dungeon / basement someplace in his house.
And he's not looking so hot. He looks like he's been beaten on a little bit. Probably malnourished, is not getting much in the way of food or water down there either.
I think that when earlier in the earlier episodes, when you were talking about how Wilson Fisk has the knuckles, the bloody knuckles all the time, I think we know now what he's contacting with to get bloody knuckles on a regular basis. So he goes down, has his supper, beats on this guy, throws him back in his cell, and then turns back to being mayor. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means in terms of his reforming and becoming a better man. We also see Fisk's day as mayor through a number of things. Look at his frustrations at having to go through channels to do some redevelopment on the docks he's trying to do. We're looking at him suffering through numerous versions of people singing "We Built This City" to him, from small children to some sort of community group. We see his angry reckoning with his young assistant Daniel after it's found out that his plans to sort of circumvent the unions in changing some of the garbage pickup have been found out, and he's now being called Mayor Garbage and stuff like this in the papers.
Yeah.
So, and then we see Murdock's day, where he is called early in the day and told that he has to go in. A favor's been called in where they need a public defender. So he goes in, he meets up with a repeat offender who's been charged with stealing 5 boxes of fiddle faddle. We, in fact, saw the fiddle faddle arrest earlier in the show. He uses then sort of some philosophy and some flirting, manages to get a lovely lady prosecutor. I'm not sure exactly what the job is, but someone who is managing the caseload to reduce the sentence down to get his client a good deal. Goes back with that good deal to the client, who does not appreciate it as much as we might thought. But I think it's interesting because we really get a look at him again as a street level lawyer, like that sort of pro bono stuff that he was famous for in the comics for the first, 150 more issues, right? So,
and his, sweet talking and playful sort of thing with women in the comics definitely appeared in this scene.
So it was a very Murdock kind of thing. And so get all of that, and then the episode ends essentially with these sort of dovetailing in. We see shots of Fisk eating with his prisoner, Murdock leaving Heather in bed to go out and do martial arts on the roof, and an unnamed masked man draining his captured victim's blood in his lair.
So that's a good recap. I hadn't boiled it down into those storylines, but because we kind of keep flipping back and forth between them, it does
Yeah.
seem more complicated than that. But this does a really good job of boiling it down.
I also would be interested to know how people feel who haven't read so many of the comics because or aren't listening to all of the podcasts or shows, YouTube shows talking about what's going on, because Muse is not explained at all.
No,
The guy who's kidnapping people and killing them and draining their blood, this is Muse, that sort of homicidal artist, but they haven't explained that at all.
So I got in trouble with my wife in episode 2 when Hector Ayala comes down the stairs and then breaks up the fight, and right after all that happens, it goes to the credits, and I said,
Yep.
"Oh my God, that's got to be Hector Ayala. That's the White Tiger." And she's like, "Spoilers." And then last, when we're watching episode 4, and the guy is draining the guy's blood, and you see his face and his breathing and the mask and all this, she's like, "Who is that?" I have no idea. And I didn't say a word. I did not say a word.
It was a test. You passed.
It was a test. I passed. Presumably. So yes, no, you don't have any, we're seeing all of the artwork and stuff, and that is done by this Muse character, but they haven't kind of put 2 and 2 together for anybody that doesn't know who that character is and what he is in the comics. And I didn't until you and I had talked about it right before
Have we
the
even
show
actually
started.
seen him making any artwork?
We've seen a silhouetted person doing some painting, but we don't know that it was him.
So really, that's what I think is that for people who are just watching the show, they would have no reason to understand that he is a graffiti artist. He is the graffiti artist doing this stuff right now. He's just this weird dude killing people, and there's a graffiti artist out there.
Yes.
But yes, spoiler alert. I apologize for this. They may be the same person. So it is, I think, a well-structured episode in a lot of ways, but it's a weird episode in terms of being a Marvel show,
I'm going to say that this is my least favorite episode of the episodes that we've had so far, and I feel like part of the reason for that is that it feels like it drug a little bit, and maybe that dovetails into our first discussion topic. The first half of that episode sort of focuses on another case that Matt Murdock is working on, and you bring up the fact that might be because of the writer that they got on this episode.
Yeah, when I was watching the episode, one thing that struck me early on was that there was somebody named David Feige who was credited as a writer on it. And my nepotism sort of antenna immediately went up.
Yes.
What is this? He's got his kid now writing Daredevil because that's just the way they're going to do it. But in actual fact, David Feige is completely a different branch of the Feige tree, evidently. Not related to Kevin in any way, but he is somebody who's been making sort of legal-related television shows and documentaries and working as a lawyer since Feige was in short pants, essentially, right? So this guy has actually worked on a legal drama called Raising the Bar. He was board chair of something called the Bronx Freedom Fund. He's done a documentary called Untouchable. There are just a bunch of different things he's worked on that are very real law type of things, as well as doing a lot of work in terms of Hollywood and the like with dramas based on legal stories. So I was really impressed, if nothing else, by how good a lawyer Matt Murdock was in this episode.
Yes.
Regardless how his client feels, because he's got a client who he got caught stealing fiddle faddle. He didn't like the fact that he got caught for like the 50th time, and he's going to have to do like 20 days or whatever. He wants probation. And Murdoch's like, I can't do that, but I'll see what I can do. He flirts and finagles his way down to getting, like a pretty good, like what, 10-day or something like that sentence?
10 days
like,
with today.
He'll spend like 7 and be home by the weekend or whatever.
Yeah,
and the guy's just like, no. But I really was impressed by how much that felt like it was probably written by somebody who actually had some idea what it was like to be a public defender.
Yeah.
So from a legal standpoint, I think this was the best law that I've seen Matt Murdock do in comic books or on TV in quite some time. And like you mentioned, I love the fact that he does it partly by being a good lawyer and partly just by being this, adorable rogue who somehow or another manages to, captivate all of the ladies and get them to give his clients better sentences. So it's a perfect Matt Murdock kind of thing. But I do think that the fact they brought him in to work on this show means that they are concerned about getting some of the law right and really focusing on him as a lawyer. Now, that can be a good thing or a bad thing. I'm suspecting that if he's writing more of the episodes, it's going to concern you, because that's going to mean less action and more of this sort of thing.
So last week, we talked about the fact that the Hector Ayala trial, like, I really enjoyed that episode. I thought getting to see Matt Murdock, the lawyer, was really important for the show, and I found it really interesting. This week, however, there were a couple things. One, Leroy Bradford, his client, was not a very likable fellow. I mean, he was being really bad, really nasty to our man Matt Murdock. That's the one thing. And I get that he's got some social and economic things that are causing him to have to do this and that sort of thing, and he kind of explains it at the end after being kind of a complete tool to Matt Murdock all to this. But also it just it felt like a rehash of something we had already seen. Like, we've seen Matt Murdock be the lawyer, and I get that he is a lawyer and that he's not Daredevil yet again, but it just felt like more of the same, but with a less likable person he's trying to defend. And the biggest thing to me is it felt like the whole reason that scene was in there was because he needed to we needed a reason for him to meet up with Powell again, to question him about the White Tiger and him dying, because it didn't feel like it served much of a purpose beyond that, to me at least.
See, to me, I think what this did, in terms of what this episode does narratively, is you have him coming off a difficult case where he won, and then his client gets murdered right afterwards. So the law works for him, but his guy still suffers. We then come in, and now as a public defender, he comes into another case, not a likable defendant at all. But nonetheless, he goes in, he gets the law to work as well as it can for this guy. And even at that, in the end, he realizes that, this dude just has no belief in the system whatsoever anymore. And because of that, in 2 consecutive episodes with both of these, he's seeing that whether it seems like the law works or the law doesn't work or whatever, in the end, the system is not actually doing what it needs to. And I think that feeds back into the title of this, right? Yeah. Sic Semper Systema. Because you've got thus always to tyrants, Sic Semper Tyrannis. It's thus always to the system, or with the system, that the system is always broken. The system is always going to system, essentially. Right. And so it's not flexible, and it's always going to work out for those in power and for those who get to make the rules. And so I think what this does is it's the breaking point where he goes home and he talks to Heather and he's like, I had a bad day. I've had, my client died, even though I got him off. And now today did what I could and still couldn't make it work. And, by the end of the night, he's out grabbing ninja stuff and he's hanging out on the roof, getting ready, presumably, to start kicking some butt as in Vigilante again next week. So I think that the title of the show, what it's telling us is that this fed into his breaking point.
Yeah.
Where he's just like, even with fiddle faddle, the system just doesn't work, right?
Yeah, the belief in the system is now, if it wasn't in a lot of trouble after seeing what happened to Hector Ayala, it definitely, another thing. Because he's like, you should be thanking me, and he's like, listen, they're willing to lock me up and spend thousands and thousands of more dollars on me locking me up than to just, help me get food because I'm starving and I'm sick of eating stuff out of dumpsters.
Yep. So I think that was a big part of it. And it did work for me. I actually did enjoy this episode. The only time it really drugged for me was when we were in the middle of Fisk's day, and I think it was supposed to. Like the interminableness of all those people singing that song to him is like, man, this is why I never want to be mayor, right?
Right.
It's so boring.
So I read something funny on social media. They talked about the kids doing the "We Built This City." They apparently had to reshoot that, according to the director, because the kids actually do good a job singing that song, and they had to bring in more kids and have them sing off key in order to make it sound as bad as it ended up being in the episode.
There you go. That makes sense, actually. I can see that. That was my first point. Was
sure.
I think it was interesting looking at who the writer was and how that fed into kind of the focus of the show. How about you? What's one of your first big things you wanted to talk about?
I mean, I think we covered kind of that whole Bodega Holdup with Leroy Bradford and everything. And like I said, I felt like it was a little slow. I felt like the reason it was there was to bring him in confrontation with Officer Powell again. Though I didn't think he had actually done it. And so it was kind of interesting that, we end up finding out that he didn't, in fact, really know anything about that or have anything to do with it. We hear his heartbeat and he's not lying about not knowing what's going on about that. And then, you were talking about kind of the preening in that, he's threatening him again about going to the bar and explaining that, all this is happening and maybe he should get some more of his excitable coworkers and they can come and see him again. And he's like, well, you better bring more of them this time than you did last time. And so,
yeah, those two do not like each other. I will note, though, talking about it, Charlie Hudson III, the guy who played the perp, the fiddle faddle fan. Oh my God, did he do a great job? I think he was absolutely unlikable in that he made fun of a blind man, and he was basically like, I did something terrible and now I want everyone to do exactly what I say. I committed my 47th crime and now I just want probation and I'm taking nothing less. Like somehow he can demand this.
Yeah.
And yet by the end, once he gets through his monologue, you kind of understand
you feel for him. Yeah.
If you really even feel bad for him so much as you understand him. You understand how he got to that point. And you understand a little bit how the system starts driving people back into these vicious circles. That he's like, the last time that I got caught, then I got thrown off of assistance. And because I was off that, then I don't have any food. And now I'm sick of all the bad food. So I decided I wanted something good. I loved caramel corn. So I stole some caramel corn and now I'm back in, and it all kind of, and the show doesn't make him really likable. It doesn't defend his decisions. it just puts them out there in a way where you've got to
Presents it,
understand,
yeah.
you know. And he does a fantastic job as an actor of sort of walking that line as well. So
Yes.
I actually really enjoyed that part.
Yes, I will say he did a fantastic job. I still did not particularly care for the scene overall, but it makes a lot more sense now that you say that. Though I did like the little drop in of, was it a scroll that did it?
That was
referring to the secret.
Could it have been a scroll? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he's caught in all sorts of video footage and everything. And there's no way he's completely dead to rights. And he's like, what if it was a scroll?
Yeah.
Murdock's just like, no, we're not going with a scroll.
Yeah.
So
but we have a secret invasion reference. I thought they would kind of completely sort of wipe their hands and forget that even happened.
It is kind of surprising that they're bringing that up, actually. I would have thought that as well.
So you wanted to talk about David Blake. And he has a very interesting day, and in fact, he gets in some trouble.
I think it's very intriguing because he is in many ways presented almost like a young Wilson Fisk. Yes. He is this kid who he's obviously starstruck with the power and with sort of the just the magnetism of Fisk and the things he's able to get done. The corruption, the power, all of it is just, sugar for him. But this David Blake guy, is he going to go all the way bad, I wonder? Is he going to become sort of young Kingpin at some point? Or does he maybe have secrets of his own? And I ask this because I was reading something online that I think is interesting. And we'll see if it attaches. I'd kind of like if it does, but I don't know if it's going to. And that is that there was actually a cop killed by Fisk in the original Daredevil series whose last name was Blake. And it's very possible with the time lapse and whatever else that this Blake could be his son or some sort of relative, and that he is essentially going in there as a deep plant or just on his own trying to get dirt or do something so that he can take down the Kingpin. And if that's the case, he could be playing some crazy long con where he brings BB in and he accidentally, quote unquote, gives her some information so that he can make this, sort of petition of love to Fisk, and then kind of know that with the personality that the mayor has, that may actually bring him even farther into the circle, right?
That is a tough gambit to play, though, because it looked like the old Wilson Fisk, when he comes clean in the office, when Fisk is yelling at the staff about the leak, and he comes clean after Sheila tells him not to.
Yep.
I mean, I thought he was going to just get pummeled right there almost.
It could be. It's a dangerous game to be playing. There's no question.
Yes.
And he's most likely to end up dead if that's the case. To be quite frank, he's most likely to end up dead anyways, because he's used up his one mistake, and instead of running away like a sensible person, he has now doubled down and is staying in the office.
Yes.
So we'll see what happens. But I do find it interesting because he is kind of that lost young kid that we see so many of them sort of falling into the orbit of some of these conservative influencers. And I don't know. How's this going to play out? Is he going to go down the rabbit hole, or is he somehow or another going to make his way back out? So,
yeah, I actually, so Michael Gandolfini, James Gandolfini's son, is the one who's playing Daniel Blake, and I think he's done a fantastic job across these first 3 episodes.
Absolutely, because he also has a tough job to do, and that's the other thing. It's a matter of he's gotten enough screen time through these episodes that there's got to be something more to his story.
Right.
So the question is, what is that going to be? And I'm thinking that probably it's more likely that he's going to somehow have his own secret agenda than that he's going to become the new right-hand man of Fisk. But it could potentially be either one. Or
Yeah.
Or maybe he really steps up his game at the gym and he becomes the next Vanessa lover, and then he ends up in the cage. I'm not betting on that one.
No, no, I don't think that.
No.
I don't think that's a thing.
But I think he's going to be an interesting character to watch as we move along. So
I want to talk about John Bernthal and the Punisher. Like I said, we've been expecting his return. He is the picture on the still on the episode. There's a shot of them together, as kind of the background before you go into the episode. And wow, that was every bit as good as I was hoping it would be. And you want to talk about, like, if you're kind of questioning what you're thinking and how you're feeling towards the system, talking to Frank Castle probably isn't going to help you reassure you that your thinking is bad and you should go back to the way you were thinking before. He looked a little rough. He's got a beard now. He does not look like he's very well kept. He's in a room full of weaponry and circuit boards and all this sort of thing. He's got a wall behind him of presumably people that he is stalking and finding and killing, because there's X's across a whole bunch of them as well. And this was like, the whole scene ends up being about 5 or 6 minutes, I want to say, but it was really, really memorable. And it starts off with him, with Murdock talking about Hector Ayala and showing him the casing, and as you pointed out, he talks about fanboys, doing this, obviously meaning he had nothing to do with this. And then it gets into, talk of the system and how it's not this, Frank has the idea that he came there for permission to turn back into Daredevil, to go out and do his vigilante things again. And he says it's absurd. But at the same time, you can almost see it. And that back and forth where Frank says, so now what? Everyday Bullseye goes out to the chow hole, eats his slop. He gets to breathe the same air you breathe. You feel good about that? And Murdock screams back, he got life. And then Castle says, how about Foggy? He get life? And then Murdock responds, Foggy, he's the kindest, purest soul I've ever met. The guy's like you and me. We can work a lifetime and never measure up to his decency. And he's like crying as he's trying to get through all this. It was just really well acted. Those two play off each other really, really well. And I hope we see more of John Bernthal in the rest of the season. I know we're presumably going to see him in his own Punisher special TV episode later this year, it sounds like.
Yep.
But I hope we're not done with Frank Castle in Daredevil Born Again.
Now, what I've heard is some people are saying this is all he gets in this one, which would be unfortunate, because yes. I would like, if they're going to deal with Punisher cops, you have to have the Punisher there.
Yes.
So,
no doubt.
And I'm hoping that they're not just, the fact that he's still bumping up against the detective and the like. I can't believe that he's done with the Punisher cops. So the Punisher himself's going to have to be involved in that. And I'm hoping that does come to a head at some point and we get all of those involved. But it was interesting, because they both are talking about their motivations, that essentially the weird thing is that the Punisher's motivation to become a vigilante was the death of his family.
Yes.
And Daredevil's motivation to stop being a vigilante is the death of his friend.
Yeah.
As weird as that is, right? Now, his original motivation to become a hero was also the death of his family. So they both had a similar beginning, but then when Foggy died, he went down a different path. It is weird to see, this sort of argument going on. I at first thought that he was there to find out whether Castle had actually straight up been the one to murder White Tiger, just to make sure that he wasn't. And when he puts a bullet on, and the guy's like, he's fanboy, he knows that if the Punisher kills somebody, he doesn't deny it. He's not like, oh, it wasn't me. He's like, yep, he deserved it, right? So at that point, they move on. But it will be disappointing if we don't see more of him during the season, because among other things, just Barenthal does a really good job with it, and I think that they're going to be talking about some interesting things this season, that it would be cool to have the Punisher involved and that dynamic. But we'll see how it goes. I do have a sidebar for you, by the way, while we're at this.
Okay.
So as he's talking about, that Bullseye got life, what did Foggy get? I think that as we move farther and farther along, that's a question that I'm asking more and more. What did Foggy get? Like, probably the thing that has most brought it to mind is, as I've been rereading books, getting ready for us to return our Daredevil comic studies, in the first run of Brubaker books, Foggy Nelson dies, but not really. But the interesting thing is that Matt Murdock hears his heart stop in prison. And Matt Murdock hears Foggy's heart stop on the rooftop here as well. And in actual fact, in the comics, Foggy is just in witness protection. He's whisked away and brought back, and so he's just away in protection. Murdock thinks he's dead for like 6 months or whatever, though. What do you think are the chances as we move along? I'm over my frustration of I can't believe they killed Foggy to I don't believe they killed Foggy. Do you think he'll be back this year? Or do you think next year? Or do you think they actually killed Foggy?
Well, first off, I haven't read those Brubaker books, so you've told me I had started reading those. So, yeah, thanks.
You could have stopped me.
I wasn't sure where you were going. I've seen that too. I saw the comments about the witness relocation and that sort of thing, and there was comments made by Kevin Feige saying that Foggy Nelson is integral to telling a Matt Murdock Daredevil story, and that we haven't seen the last of Foggy Nelson. And I wasn't sure how you go about doing that. Just the same with Karen Page. He was talking about both those characters, and we saw them for minutes at the beginning of episode 1, and we really haven't seen much more of Karen beyond that post courtroom scene a little bit later on in episode 1. I feel like he has to be dead, and that they're somehow going to use flashbacks, or they're going to use him just talking to him like the Punisher says, his family talks to him, his son talks to him whenever he sort of stops. I feel like we're going to get that kind of Foggy at some point.
I had forgotten just how easy it was to bring characters back from the dead in comic books. And I'm going to bet at this point that he is off in witness protection someplace, and that we have not seen the last of him. That they're just going to, they literally can do the same thing as in the comics. That, well, yeah, he seemed dead, but we got him in the ambulance and we brought him back. And then obviously it was too dangerous to let him back on the streets. So he's just been gone. But yeah, that, so Also, this dovetails into your, this was your least favorite episode, it seems like.
Yes.
The number of times Foggy was killed in this episode is 0. So it still is better for me than episode 1, which retains its rank as the worst of the episodes. So we'll see.
So I did want to mention one last thing about John Bernthal for a comment that I'd seen on social media. Is he was originally not going to be a part of Born Again because of the way the show was originally writing Frank Castle, the Punisher, into the story, and would only sign on after they did the rework of the show. And so this is interesting because, like, this felt like it was supposed to be there. And the other fact that this conversation happened was filmed with the idea that it was going to be later in the season, and then they moved it up so that it was in this episode. He felt like this was a better jump, like better telling of the character and that sort of thing as well. So
interesting.
Very, very interesting when it comes to that. And like I said, this episode is not bad. There are parts about this episode I really liked. The Punisher conversation as well. It just is my least favorite episode of the 4 episodes that we've had so far.
The big blurb on our social media post is going to be like, Dwayne says, worst Daredevil ever. Is this series savable?
Yes. If we were looking to clickbait this, we could definitely do that.
So, all right. So what else did you have in here that you wanted to talk about?
So I guess my last point would be talking about Adam and talking about the fact that the Kingpin really isn't as reformed as he's trying to make himself out to be. And it's really, like, I don't know that it comes as a surprise to me that that's the case. I feel like the interesting thing is, like, the Muse picture right at the very beginning of the episode, where you see the 2 versions of Wilson Fisk, the version with him being like the mayor and then the other half with him in a dark suit and like flames like he's the devil. You see both of those in this episode. You see him be the mayor and he's sitting in a classroom clapping for kids singing "We Built This City." And then at the end of the episode, we see the giant hulking of man come down to this basement where he has the painting that has his blood on it from that final fight in season 3. And then we see this caged man pleading for his, to be released and let go. And it's, yeah, it totally should have expected it, was totally hoping he was as reformed as he was trying to make himself out to be, but I guess not surprised that he is not quite there yet.
Huh. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. It is the white on white painting from the previous seasons. The interesting thing about that is that in some ways you can look at that and go that, Fisk has this little prison where he is keeping all the things that are precious to Vanessa and keeping them away from her, essentially punishing her.
Yeah.
That for as much as she talks about how he could never hurt her, that's exactly what he's doing right now. He is taking the things that matter to her. And then he's also trying to take away her ability to sort of succeed in the various nefarious criminal endeavors,
business enterprises, that she was good at.
So much a fan of, right? So he's getting in her way in terms of her business interests as well. So that is really kind of powerful, though, that the boyfriend and that piece that brought them together, that was one of her favorites, are just sort of locked away where she can't get at them, under his control.
It is interesting because she even asks him, because Heather asks after their therapy session, do you feel safe in your marriage? And she's like, "Oh, honey, there's there's a lot of things Wilson Fisk could do, but he would never hurt me." And then she asks him at the table. She's like, when Dr. Glenn wanted to talk to me, she wanted to know if I was safe. And he's like, I felt like I was safe. And should I feel safe? Like she I think does not know where he's at. And like I think she's questioning it more and more.
Yes. And that makes sense because the simple fact is that trusting Wilson Fisk has never been a particularly good idea. For as much as he says he values loyalty and the like, he gives no loyalty. So if he needs to throw you out of the helicopter to save himself, you're going out of that helicopter, right?
Yes.
So.
All right. Do you have one last point you want to talk about with regards to this week's episode, Dan?
The other thing that was on mine as far as a bullet point, I think we've really talked about, but I actually loved the characterization of Matt Murdock in this. I love the fact that we had kind of the competent lawyer, the sort of, schmoozer who's got the ladies after him all over the place. So he convinces the one pretty lawyer to let his client off while essentially getting himself, noticed by her. He heads home and charms Heather and takes her to bed. And then at a certain point, he's like, all of this is not enough for me. I still need to go run around out in the night in my long underwear and beat people up. And so he goes back up and starts practicing. So this
is very much Matt Murdock from the comics. Yeah.
I mean, I love the fact that they do the same thing. I think when we first started, in fact, one of the things I loved from Stan Lee about Daredevil was that he created it with a disabled main character. And for the entire run of Lee being on the comics, basically he was a blind guy who, for all intents and purposes, was James Bond, right?
Yeah.
He was the coolest guy. He knew everything. The women swooned, the college students when he came on campus to give a guest lecture.
I remember that. Yep.
He had women of all sorts at his feet, and his Foggy adores him and basically would do anything for him. So it's just a very good characterization of Matt Murdock. And I think that, Charlie Cox is a perfect visual representation of Matt Murdock because he's got kind of that boyish charm and yet a little bit of the hard edge behind that. It's just fantastic. And this episode really, it was slow in some ways, mostly with the school children, but in a few other places. But I really enjoyed it just because it felt like, not like Daredevil, but it felt like Matt Murdock. Like if you were going to have one of those times where he's thrown in the cowl for a while because he's upset, this is the best of Matt Murdock, is what we were shown.
I think Charlie Cox has done a fantastic job of being both Matt Murdock and Daredevil throughout his run as the character across the two TV series. And I don't know that there is going to be another actor who's going to be able to do it as well. Like it is always going to be Charlie Cox to me. This character going forward.
I would say that makes sense. I'm fine with that. I would love it if when we get to that point they just, bring in Daredevil Jr. and let them take over and he can just turn into Stick and hang around.
There you go.
So,
there you go.
But good stuff.
Do you have a big question for this week then?
I have a big question for you. So kind of as I noted before, this is an entire episode of what is supposed to be a superhero adaptation, right?
Uh-huh.
In which there was not a single punch thrown, there was not a single shot, there was not a single car chase, there was not a single person really even jumping in some sort of animated manner, right?
Right.
It it was absolutely an episode of sort of the West Wing / LA Law, right?
Character development times 10,
Yep.
basically.
So we did have a couple times where, Murdock or some of the others would sort of puff up like a little peacock and they'd push each other around. You get some raised voices, but there was no violence and really, barely even implied actual violence in the episode. So my question is, what would Jack Kirby have thought about this version of Daredevil? Or Stan Lee, these guys that, if you remember the original Daredevil comics, if you didn't have somebody throwing down by page 2, something was wrong, right?
Yes, there was a lot there. I mean, the stories were built around the action, and there was very little non-action in their version of Daredevil in Volume 1. I don't know what they would think of this. I think that if we use the comics as a judge, I think that they would think there needs to be more action across in the show. And to be fair, there's been some action across the first one. We haven't seen anything like that. So, I mean, as long as they don't make a habit of this, I think I like a good character development. I like interesting characters on the screen interacting with one another. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it works really well in TV shows and movies. I think it does. I think it works surprisingly well. We've seen it work surprisingly well in comics, actually. But I feel like action is a essential component to Daredevil, and so I feel like it needs to come back to that at some point, and hopefully that's sooner rather than later.
Well, and I mean, really, when you talked about the first 2 episodes, you used a term that I loved. You said it was what was it, a violence sandwich or something like that?
Violence sandwich, yeah.
Where we had a couple minutes at the beginning with the bullseye fight, and then we had a couple minutes at the end of episode 2 with the fight with the 2 cops. And other than that, there was no action in those. And then you get to the White Tiger one, we have a small altercation where they stop the motorcade, or I mean, where they stop the truck and the 2 guys get shot, and then you have the White Tiger getting shot. But there's probably, like I said, about 3 seconds worth of violence in that episode. Other than the protracted scenes at the beginning of episode 1, the end of episode 2, there's essentially been no action in these at all. If there's been anything, it's just been sort of immediate brutal violence that moves on.
Yes.
White Tiger didn't get killed in the middle of some crazy kung fu fight.
No.
He just was walking down the street. So I do think that as an action premised character, it's a little weird how far they've taken Daredevil in terms of moving him away from that. And I understand that the reason for that is because he is currently in a phase of believing that the choices he's made that have led to violence are some of the things that have made problems for him and the people he cares about in his life. So he's trying to change his ways. And Fisk is trying to do something different. So he's trying to change his ways. And what we're going to get is essentially a train wreck where the 2 of them finally just go back to their natures and probably destroy half the city. But it's a very slow burn.
Yes. And like I said, for the most part, I've really enjoyed it to this point. Just this week, I just felt like I wanted a little bit more, and if the ending of the episode is any indication, I think we are not going to have to wait too much longer for that absolute train wreck that you're talking about, because it does sort of seem like both of them are careening off the road as we speak.
Yeah, things are starting to fall apart, but we'll see how it goes here. We'll see how it goes.
All right. I think that puts a wrap on episode 4 for this week and this episode of the Comics Overtime podcast. We'd like to thank you for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, please consider subscribing on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as soon as it's released. If you've already subscribed, we'd appreciate it if you'd share the show via social media or leave us a review. That'll help other new listeners find the show that much easier. Whether you're new to the podcast or you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts on this week's show. Tell us what you think about episode 4. Am I completely wrong? Was this the best episode yet? What did you like about it? We want to know. We'll talk about it. If you send us some comments, you can send us those comments via email. That address is comments@comicsovertime.com, or you can reach out to us via social media. On Blue Sky, we are at Comics Overtime there. Dan, I hope they explain who the Muse is here pretty soon. I mean, we finally got some glimpses of him this week. It's just been his graffiti art to this point, so I feel like they're gonna have to start that story, and then we've got our the two main figures, Wilson Fisk, Matt Murdock. They seem to be very close to kind of falling back into their own way, into their old ways, which could mean for quite the fireworks fiesta in the second half of the season.
Well, and I'm not exactly sure that I would even give Wilson Fisk credit for saying that he's turned over a new leaf. He's just trying to change his public persona a little bit.
Yes.
But he's not necessarily trying to be a better man like Murdock is. He's just maybe trying to not get caught the same way he did before. So
right. Yes.
We'll see how it goes. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing what folks might have to say about it. And we'll see how next week goes. Maybe we'll actually get to see the horns. It's possible.
Yeah. We may have one episode. We may have 2 episodes next week. It doesn't seem entirely clear. Whatever gets released next week, we'll talk about it next Friday. We hope you'll join us. Until next week, take care, everybody.
See you later, folks.